Okay, the Horseman has a variety of uses, and the main one that's talked about is him as a counter to the ninja. Yes, he dies, but their ninja dies, and it doesn't kill whatever it is that was going to be your first card. I have seen the Horseman played late game. The Horseman will never be the last card in the back row. He will always be second to last. So the Horseman allows you to switch around your strategy to kind of screw up your opponent's strategy, but you do have to think about that his attack and his health will go against whatever it is that's coming up. So keep that in mind when using the Horseman. The Lanceman is essentially, for our metagame purposes, better than the Dwarvish because he's consistent. We're going to know that he always does 1 damage to rank 2 and 3 enemies, and he's not doing any damage to anybody behind him. We can keep him alive long enough, he can really screw up a bunch of stuff. But he is not easy to keep alive. But he definitely has his uses, especially to get their martyr away or to get rid of their nurse. If you can poke a lot of things for 1 damage, that's a lot of damage to get rid of. And it will screw them up. And if you can keep them alive long enough, it will continue to screw them up. And it might even turn the game for you. The Mad Bomber is probably the hardest card to use right now. And you might be surprised that I would say that, but he is. A lot of people are putting him first, which makes sense. Essentially, by putting him first, you're basically saying you can't use things that are worth 1 health or they're going to die. So you're getting rid of them using a sniper. Could they still put a sniper in front of a martyr and keep it alive? Yeah, they could. So don't think that they are totally unallowed to play 1 health cards. You've just made it harder for them to play 1 health cards. Yes, it's possible to keep your own bomber alive for at least a round or 2. And if you do, you've screwed them up a lot. But remember, you're hurting yourself as well, so you need to be prepared for that. Mr. Spiked Pickle as a icon here, also known as the Martyr, is played a ton. What does he do? Well, he absorbs the damage of the guy in front of him. I always forget that he doesn't help the guy behind him. So don't forget that. He only helps the guy in front. So he'll heal that. So putting a nurse in front of him is very helpful to that nurse. It will keep that nurse alive longer, and the nurse can heal him. Putting a cleric in front of him, the cleric can heal him. And if the cleric is only taking 1 damage, then he's only taking 1 damage, and he's going to continue to be healed. So him last and the cleric before him would actually negate a sniper. But he's better used as a second position, so he keeps your first card alive longer. He doesn't have a great deal of health, so you're going to need the nurse, or the shield maiden, or a cleric, or a combination thereof to keep him alive longer, so that he can keep alive whatever's in front of him longer. Do remember that once that thing that's in front of him does die, or if he dies, the whole strategy collapses. The ninja is a really straightforward card, and is most often put in the front. He basically will kill everything, for sure. He will kill the martyr if the martyr is behind something. So, he might be your answer to the martyr. Keeping your own ninja alive long enough to do more than 1 kill is very difficult. It's not impossible, but although I've seen it done before, I just don't always necessarily would recommend that as a good metagame. Remember, your martyr's only good until your martyr dies. So if they put up a ninja versus your ninja, then that whole strategy kind of collapses. The nurse will heal cards in front and behind her for 1 health as long as those cards are still alive. If the martyr is behind her, that means that any damage done to the nurse is taken by the martyr. And if the martyr is still alive, the nurse will heal him. So, nurse, martyr, shield maiden will ensure that the nurse stays alive a very long time. But is that useful? Well, as we can see from looking at the nurse, she's not much of a fighter. So it's only useful if the nurse is healing something in front of her that's very useful to you, whatever that might be. The nurse is a very good card and has a lot of uses, but like any support card, once it dies, its usefulness is gone, and once the card it's protecting dies, its usefulness can pretty much be said to be destroyed as well. So always bank around the idea that the worst is going to happen and try to plan for that contingency. The page can be the difference between a win and a lose, especially if we're metagaming and we're assuming that those random variable cards will only do 1 damage. We now know that those cards will do 2 damage, which changes everything. A page behind a card that's random makes that card at least do 1 damage if that card is doing random normal damage. It does not increase the special damage of that card. Keep this in mind when using the page. By itself, the page is not very good at fighting, but will survive long enough to do something, but not a lot. The Shield Maiden really acts as a keep something alive a little bit longer card. On her own, like the page, she doesn't do a lot and won't be expected to survive long. Essentially, she is there to make sure whatever's in front of her takes 1 less damage, to a minimum of 1. That means you can't reduce damage down to 0. The Maiden is useful and is played a lot behind the Martyr. So the Martyr, instead of taking 2 damage, will only take 1. If you have a Cleric in your ranks as well, that means that the Cleric will be able to heal that Martyr continually. But remember, if any of your support cards die, whatever you were supporting with them is now going to die, and your strategy might fall apart. But it might keep you alive long enough to win the game. We're going to assume that the sniper will only be doing 1 damage to their rearmost enemy card. Counters to the sniper include the wall, which we'll see in a moment here, as well as a martyr with a nurse in front of it. Other counters do exist. Of course, sniper in the back row, and they have a sniper in the back row, means both are going to die. But it might be an acceptable loss if you want to get rid of their sniper before their sniper screws you over. We're going to assume that their sniper is going to always do 2 damage to our rearmost card, so we're going to try to plan around that. The sniper is a good surprise, but as far as a fighting unit, we can tell by looking at him, he is not going to survive long, and trying to keep him alive long might not be worth our efforts. So put him in towards the end, not too far back, probably rank 3 or 4 will be fine for him. The Spearman actually could be a very decent, acceptable counter to their Hellbearer because he does have the ability to take them down if you have the Swordman behind him to increase his attack by 1. He'll do 4 damage to them, they'll do 4 damage to you, they will die, you will live 1 more round to do 3 damage to something else again. But after that, your effectiveness is pretty much gone. He's a decent vanilla card and has his uses in formations, but it's up to you to decide when and where and how to use them. Keeping him alive longer might be to your advantage. After all, he does have a good damage output and he does have a good health. The swordsman we can count on for doing at least 2 damage, and we could say that the swordsman might actually make a very decent keep alive card at the front. Because we know that we're always doing 2 damage and that he has a decent health, he might actually be better in certain circumstances than the Spearman, because he might do 4 damage. But we're going to assume that he's only going to be doing 2 damage and that their swordmen, if they have one, will always be doing 4 damage to us. So we're going to try to build around that and assume the worst case scenario. However, I would still say keeping the swordsman alive could prove to be a very interesting game. The wallman or wall is essentially your counter to a sniper and can really screw them up. He has an insane amount of health, but a very low attack. Keeping this guy alive is not hard. However, you do have to remember that whatever they're sending against you will be something that he will have trouble taking down. So keeping him alive long enough to do damage is something that might not be worth your time and trouble. Is Wallman a counter? Yes. Is Wallman a card that could win you the game? Possibly. Wallman is certainly an interesting card and deserves a bit more attention than he's getting right now. Well, that concludes my look at the various Alice Army cards that we currently have. I hope that some of this information might give you some new strategies to try out or some new ideas that you didn't have before. Take care and see you next time. Peace out.